Okay, good enough. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim, and on the 15th day of the second month after they had left Egypt, they came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. Now, the wilderness of Sin was a vast, hostile environment of sand and stone. Its barren surroundings provided the perfect place for God to test and shape the character of his people. Verse 2. There in the desert they all complained to Moses and Aaron, and said to them, We wish that the Lord had destroyed us in Egypt. There we could have at least sat down and eat meat as much as other food as we wanted. But you have brought us out of this desert to starve us all to death. It happened again. As the Israelites encountered danger, shortages, and inconvenience, they complained. They complained bitterly and longed to be back in Egypt. But as always, God provided for their needs. Difficult circumstances often lead to stress, anxiety, and complaining as a natural response. The Israelites did not really want to be back in Egypt. They just wanted life to get a little easier. In the pressure of the moment, they could not focus on the cause of their stress. In this case, lack of trust in God. They could only think about the quickest way to escape. When pressure comes your way, resist the temptation to make a quick escape. Instead, focus on God's power and wisdom to help you deal with the cause of your stress. Verse 4. The Lord said to Moses, Now I'm going to cause food to rain down from the sky for all of you. The people must go out every day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I can test them to find out if they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they are to bring in twice as much as usual and prepare it. So we read 4 and 5 right now, which begs to differ, to bring something to the table. Sometimes we wish to have supplies in advance so that we can feel independent. God was training the people for a life of faith. Now, God promised to meet the Hebrews' need for food in the wilderness, but he decided to test their obedience, how well they pay attention. God wanted to see if they would obey his detailed instructions. We can learn to trust him as our Lord only by following him. We can learn to obey by taking small steps of obedience. Kind of reminds you what would have happened if there would have been in that day that shortage of toilet paper that we had a few years ago, right? At Walmart, Costco, everybody went there and took baskets full of toilet paper because the apocalypse was coming, right? They could not depend on God. They could not depend on God. Let's continue here. Verse 6. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, This evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. In the morning you will see the dazzling light of the Lord's presence. He has heard your complaints against him. Yes, against him, because we are only carrying out his instructions. Then Moses said, It is the Lord who will give you meat to eat in the evening, and as much bread as you want in the morning, because he had heard how much you have complained against him. Then you complain against us. You are really complaining against the Lord. Moses said to Aaron, Tell the whole community to come and stand before the Lord, because he has heard their complaints. As Aaron spoke to the whole community, they turned toward the desert, and suddenly the dazzling light of the Lord appeared in a cloud. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them that at twilight they will have meat to eat, and in the morning they will have all the bread they want. Then they will know that I, the Lord, am their God. In the evening, a large flock of quail flew in, enough to cover the camp. And in the morning there was dew all around the camp. When the dew evaporated, there was something thin and flaky on the surface of the desert. It was as delicate as frost. When the Israelites saw it, they didn't know what it was and asked each other, "What is it?" This is derived, the term manna, you're going to hear about that, derived from the Hebrew word manu, which means, "What is it?" by the way. That's what that is in quotations. Manu, which is, "What is it?" Moses said to them, "This is a food that the Lord has given you to eat. The Lord has commanded that each of you is to gather as much as he needs, 2 quarts for each member of his household." So manna appeared on the ground each day as little thin flakes like frost. You know, people gathered it, ground it like grain, and made it into honey tasting biscuits or pancakes, little cakes. For the Israelites, the manna was a gift. It came every day. It was just exactly what they needed to satisfy their temporary physical need. Now, in John chapter 6, verse 48 through 51, Jesus compares himself to manna. Christ is our daily bread, who satisfies our eternal and spiritual need. The Israelites did this, some gathering more and others less. When they measured it, those who gathered too much of it did not have, those who gathered much did not have too much, and those who gathered less did not have too little. Each had gathered just what he needed. Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it for tomorrow." But some of them did not listen to Moses and saved part of it. The next morning it was full of worms and smelled rotten, and Moses was angry with them. Every morning each one gathered as much as he needed, and when the sun grew hot, what was left on the ground melted. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much food, 4 quarts for each person. All the leaders of the community came and told Moses about it, and he listened to them. "The Lord has commanded that tomorrow is a holy day of rest, dedicated to him. Bake today." Hold on a second. I want to show you some before we turn the page. Something that we covered yesterday towards the end of chapter 15, which some people kind of scratch their heads at. Some people. But it kind of makes sense. I'm going to read this from the end of verse 25 of chapter 15. There the Lord gave them laws to live by, and there he also tested them. He said, "If you obey me completely by doing what I consider right, and by keeping my commands, I will not punish you with any of the diseases that are brought on the Egyptians." You notice that there's a series of laws or commands already instituted, not to mention the Sabbath over here. And yet we haven't really seen God give Moses the 10 Commandments yet. That will not happen till chapter 20 of Exodus. It lets you realize that God had already instituted some laws, maybe some common sense laws like do not murder, do not cheat, do not lie, do not steal, and observe the Sabbath. Who knows what other laws they had already mentioned briefly, but we're going to, of course, hear the 10 Commandments in a few more chapters. By tomorrow, I think. Yeah, by tomorrow. Okay. Bake today what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Whatever is left shall be put aside and kept for tomorrow. Okay. Now the Israelites were not to work on the Sabbath, not even to cook food. Why? God knew that the busy routine of daily living could distract people from heartfelt worship of Him. Work, family, responsibilities, and recreation can crowd out schedules so tightly that we do not take time to worship. Carefully guard your time with God, is the moral of the story. 24. As Moses had commanded, they kept what was left until the next day. It did not spoil or get worms in it. Moses said, "Eat this today, because today is the Sabbath, a day of rest, dedicated to the Lord. And you will not find any food outside the camp. You must gather food for 6 days, but on the seventh day, the day of rest, there will be none." Because even back then, on the seventh day, the Lord would rest. Verse 27. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather food, but they did not find any. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How much longer will your people refuse to obey my commands? Remember that I, the Lord, have given you a day of rest. And that is why on the sixth day I will always give you enough food for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where he is on the seventh day and not leave his home." So the people did not work on the seventh day. The people of Israel called the food manna. It was like a small white seed, like coriander seed actually, and tasted like thin cakes made with honey. Moses said, "The Lord has commanded us to save some manna, to be kept for our descendants, so that they can see the food which he gave us to eat in the desert when he brought us out of Egypt." Now the Hebrews put some manna in a special jar as a reminder of the way that God provided for them in the wilderness. Symbols have always been an important part of the Christian worship. Also, we use meaningful objects as symbols to remind us of God's work. Such symbols can be valuable aids to our worship as long as we are careful to keep them from becoming objects of worship themselves. All right, 33. Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar, put 2 quarts of manna in it, and place it in the Lord's presence to be kept for our descendants." As the Lord had commanded Moses, Aaron put it in front of the covenant box. It hasn't been built yet, but they put it in a container, special container, to be put in the covenant box later on, so that it could be kept. The Israelites ate manna for the next 40 years until they reached the land of Canaan, where they settled. The standard dry measure then in use equaled 20 quarts. 20 quarts. Okay, chapter 17. Water from the rock. The whole Israelite community left the desert of Sin, moving from one place to another at the command of the Lord. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there to drink. They complained to Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." It's kind of funny that just in a couple of chapters ago, they had encountered the same situation where they ate that water that was too bitter, and they were complaining to God. Well, to Moses and Aaron, but to God. Here they are at it again. Moses answered, "Why are you complaining? Why are you putting the Lord to the test?" So, in other words, again, the people complained about their problem instead of praying. Some problems can be solved by careful thought or by rearranging our priorities. Some can be solved by discussion and good counsel, but some problems can be solved only by prayer. We should make a determined effort to pray when we feel like complaining, because complaining only raises our levels of stress. Prayer quiets our thoughts and emotions and prepares us to listen to God when he speaks. 3. But the people were very thirsty and continued to complain to Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to destroy us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" 5. The Lord said to Moses, "Take some of the leaders of Israel with you. Go on ahead of the people. Take along the stick with which you struck the Nile." Here you go. All right. "I will stand before you on a rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. Moses did so in the presence of the leaders of Israel. The place was called Massa in Meribah because the Israelites complained and put the Lord to the test when they asked, "Is the Lord with us or not?" Verse 8. The Amalekites. Now, let's back up here. Amalekites. Who are the Amalekites? Remember, Amalek was a descendant of Esau. Remember Jacob and Esau? That was one of them was Amalek. So here's his descendants, if you will. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, pick out some men to go and fight for the Amalekites tomorrow. I will stand on top of the hill holding the stick that God told me to carry. Now, the Amalekites, as I said, were descendants of Amalek, a grandson of Esau. They were a fierce nomadic tribe that lived in the desert region of the Dead Sea. Nomadic means that they moved from place to place to place all the time. They made part of their livelihood by conducting frequent raids on other settlements and carrying off plundered goods. One of the greatest insults in Israelite culture was to call someone a friend of Amalek. When the Israelites entered the region, the Amalekites saw this as a perfect opportunity for profit. But this hostile tribe was moving in on the wrong group, a people led by God. For the Israelite slaves to defeat such a warlike nation was more than enough proof that God was with them, as he had promised to be. Now, what we read right here in verse 9, Moses said to Joshua, pick out some men to go and fight the Amalekites tomorrow. I will stand on top of the hill holding the stick that God told me to carry. Right here is the first time that we actually meet Joshua. That's for the first time right here. Later, he would become the great leader who would bring God's people into the promised land across the Jordan River. As a general of the Israelite army, he was gaining valuable experience for the greater battles to come. Verse 10, Joshua did as Moses commanded him and went out to fight the Amalekites, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went out to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his arms, the Israelites won. But when he put his arms down, the Amalekites started winning. When Moses' arms grew tired, Aaron and Hur brought a stone for him to sit on, while they stood beside him and held up his arms, holding them steady until the sun went down. In this way, Joshua totally defeated the Amalekites. Aaron and Hur stood by Moses' side, right by his side, and held up his arms to ensure victory against Amalek. We need to lift up the hands of our spiritual leaders as well, shouldering some responsibility in the process. Lending a word of encouragement and offering a prayer are ways of refreshing spiritual leaders in their work. 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, write an account of this victory, so that it will be remembered. Tell Joshua that I will completely destroy the Amalekites. Moses built an altar and named it, "The Lord is my banner." Jehovah Nisi is a Hebrew term. Jehovah Nisi, the Lord is my banner. He said, hold high the banner of the Lord. The Lord will continue to fight against the Amalekites forever. And yes, the fight against the Amalekites will carry on all the way to Joshua, going to the promised land with the people, all the way to King Saul, and finally ending with King David. In the future, of course. Chapter 18. Jethro visits Moses. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and the people of Israel when he led them out of Egypt. So he came to Moses, bringing with him Moses' wife Zipporah, who had been left behind, and Gershom and Eleazar, her two sons. Moses had said, I had been a foreigner in a strange land, so he had named one son Gershom. He had also said, the God of my father helped me and saved me from being killed by the king of Egypt. So he named the other son Eleazar. Jethro came with Moses' wife and her two sons into the desert, where Moses was camped at the holy mountain. He had sent word to Moses that they were coming. So Moses went out to meet him, bowed before him, and kissed him. They asked about each other's health and then went into Moses' tent. So Jethro entered Moses' tent where the two talked. Tents were the homes of shepherds in that day, in shape and design also. Now they resembled the tents of today, but they were very large and made of a thick cloth woven from goat or camel hair. This fabric breathed in warm weather and contracted in storm weather to offer protection from the winter winds and rain. The floors were often covered with animal skin rugs, while curtains divided the inside spaces into rooms. Verse 8. Moses told Jethro everything that the Lord had done to the king and the people of Egypt in order to rescue the Israelites. He also told him about the hardships the people had faced on the way and how the Lord had saved them. When Jethro heard all this, he was happy and said, Praise the Lord who saved you from the king and the people of Egypt. Praise the Lord who saves his people from slavery. 11. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, because he did this when the Egyptians treated the Israelites with such contempt. Now Moses told his father-in-law all that God had done, convincing him that the Lord was greater than any other god that Egypt had, or any other god in general. Our relatives are often the hardest people to tell about God, yet we should look for opportunities to tell them what God is doing in our lives, because we can have an important influence on them, which is always very, very, very good advice, of course. 12. Then Jethro brought an offering to be burned whole and other sacrifices to be offered to God. And Aaron and all the leaders of Israel went with him to eat the sacred meal as an act of worship. So this reunion turned into a large celebration. The Israelites frequently shared sacrificial meals among themselves. A burnt offering will be sacrificed to God, and then the meal taken from the sacrifice will be dedicated to God and eaten ceremonially as a fellowship dinner. Verse 13. The next day Moses was settling disputes among the people, and he was keeping busy from morning until night. When Jethro saw everything that Moses had to do, he asked, What is all this that you are doing for the people? Why are you doing this all alone, with people standing here from morning till night to consult you? Moses answered, I must do this because the people come to me to learn God's will. When two people have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide which one of them is right, and I tell them God's commands and laws. So Moses not only decided these cases, but also taught the people God's laws. Whenever we help others settle disputes or resolve conflicts, we should also look for opportunities to teach them about God. 17. Then Jethro said, You are not doing this right. You will wear yourself out, and these people as well. This is too much for you to do alone. Now let me give you some good advice, and God will be with you. I can already hear Moses say, You can't tell me what to do. No, but yes, it was very good advice. It is right for you to represent the people before God and bring their disputes to him. You should teach them God's commands and explain to them how they should live and what they should do. But in addition, you should choose some capable men and appoint them as leaders of the people, leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They must be God fearing men who can be trusted and who cannot be bribed. Let them serve as judges for the people on a permanent basis. They can bring all the difficult cases to you, but they themselves can decide all the smaller disputes. That will make it easier for you as they share your burden. If you do this as God commands, you will not wear yourself out, and all these people can go home with their disputes settled. Moses took Jethro's advice and chose capable men from among all the Israelites. He appointed them as leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people on a permanent basis, bringing the difficult cases to Moses, but deciding the smaller disputes themselves. Then Moses said goodbye to Jethro, and Jethro went back home. So Moses was spending so much time and energy hearing the Hebrews complain that he could not get to the other important work. Jethro suggested that Moses delegate most of his work to others and focus his efforts on jobs that only he could do. People in positions of responsibility sometimes feel they are the only ones who can do necessary tasks. But in actuality, others are often capable of handling a part of the load. Delegation relieved Moses' stress and improved the quality of governance. It actually helped prepare the Israelites for the system of government that would later be set up in Canaan. Proper delegation can multiply your effectiveness while giving others a chance to grow. Amen. Let me get something. Hold on. I'm going to bring out an atlas over here. Okay, let's see which one. Let me bring a couple of them. Hold on. Okay. I'm going to move this over here. I want to show you basically, let me put my headset on. I want to show you basically where Moses traveled with the people from Egypt down to the Red Sea and etc., where they're going to be going to. I have a couple of different atlases here to kind of help along. It's kind of you call it show and tell. Okay. Let's see. This is one. I'm going to bring out something else. I'll explain it right now. We'll be done. Hold on a second. Okay. Yeah, I think this one shows a little bit better here. Let's see. Yeah, this is a little bit better. Just because of the size, you know. Let me take out the phone from here. That way you guys can see it better. Okay. So remember Sukkoth? The first place they went to? The first place, let me get my pointer here. This is where they left from this area. Okay. This is the land of Goshen. There you go. You can see it better. This is, there you go. This is the land of Goshen where the Israelites will be living, while the Egyptians lived in this area over here, these towns over here. But this is the land of Goshen with all the rivers. Now, so they left over here, and they first went to Sukkoth, right? Then they crossed the Red Sea, which is over here, the top part of this, right there, the top part of it. It doesn't seem like much, but keep in mind, this is a map. So you have a long distance they actually walked across the Red Sea. Then they went this way, south. They're gonna end up over here in this area, Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments, in this area. Rephidim, remember Rephidim? We just read about that, the Amalekites, right? Right here. So right now, they're in this area. But we've been talking about them since they crossed the Red Sea, going the wilderness of Shur, right? There we go, going like this, going like this. Now, this is, of course, an approximation. Nobody knows exactly the route they took. Let's get this out of the way. But I want to show you where they are. When they faced the Amalekites and they fought them with Moses' arms up in the air, and he really did care, they were right here in this area, Rephidim, right here. So we're going to find out that they're actually going to go to Mount Sinai, which will be over here. Let me show you the other book right now. Now, remember I told you, here you go. They are in Rephidim right now, right over here, Rephidim. I can't put the phone, well, there you go. I guess you can see it closer. Rephidim, that's where they were at when they battled the Amalekites in the early chapter. Then they're going to go to this area, which is Mount Sinai, the mountain of the Lord. Also, but I told you a few days ago that they could have taken the short route. They could have gone from here and gone straight like that to the promised land, which is right over here. This is a promised land, right? They could have gone straight this road like that, but they didn't, because, God wanted to confuse them or make it seem that they were confused so that Pharaoh would chase them. But there's also this way to the land of the Philistines, this road up here as well, close to the water. This would have been a lot easier because they would have had, a lot more direct access, if you will, to where they were supposed to go. But God had a bigger plan. Let me show you the other book now. Okay. Now this one is similar. So here they are. This is where they left Egypt with Pharaoh over here, right? They went this way to Sukkoth. They crossed the Red Sea over here. Over here. That's where they crossed the Red Sea on the top part of the Gulf of Suez, up here. Then they went down this way. The wilderness of Sin is what it was called, right? Rephidim is right over here. This is Mount Sinai over here, where they would talk to the Lord in the Ten Commandments. Then from here, this is what happens. There we're going to go back up. They're going to be there. This is going to be about a year, close to a year. Then they're going to head up north. And right here, they were about to enter the promised land. We haven't gotten to this yet, but this is a very interesting story that I can tell you real quick. So when they were on the way to the promised land, right over here, Moses sent 12 scouts, 12 of them. Among them was Joshua and Caleb, two guys. Just remember the names, Joshua and Caleb, right? So they all went there for a while. They came back. They brought back some fruit. They brought back, everything, stories of how the soil was really fertile, um, beautiful, lush greenery, literally a land flowing with milk and honey. But they claimed, 10 of the scouts claimed that there were giants living in this area. Giants. That's where eventually Goliath, from David and Goliath will appear. But anyways, so they scared of the Israelites, saying, "Oh no, we can't go there. There's a lot of giants living there, and all their cities have giant fortified walls." But Joshua and Caleb says, "Yes, we can do it with the Lord's help." But they decided to listen to the other 10 scouts. So that's when the Lord basically took them on the roundabout way, all around, for 38 years. Until finally they did cross this way. They crossed this way, and then across to Jericho. We're going to read about that, of course, in the next few books. But this is basically the route that they took. They could have gone straight across like that. But no, they went this way. Right now they're over here. So they're going to be here for about way over a year in this area with the Lord. And then they're going to head on their way. This is they have different locations where possibly the Mount Sinai would be. This is a traditional location of Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, right over here. Let me move this over here so it's easier to see. It says right here, lightning strikes over the traditional location for Mount Sinai, which is called Jebel Musa. Right here. The mountain of the Lord, right over here. Interesting. So, yeah, I wanted to share that with you because you can't really do it justice telling you they went through the Rephidim, they went through the, area of sin, they went to Shur, and you guys go, what is that? It's a lot easier when you can see a little bit of the map of what it actually looks like. Okay, so now we read chapter 16, 17, and 18, right? So what can we glean? What can we gather out of what we learned? I'll give you like a brief rundown, as I always do, okay? So basically, just 45 days after God's miraculous deliverance, the Israelites are grumbling and wishing they were back in Egypt, where the food was better. But you know what? All their complaints against Moses are actually complaints against God. Complaining reveals our view of God and his provision. God hears their grumbling, but he doesn't punish them for mistrusting him yet. Instead, he promises food and makes himself known in the cloud. In case they've forgotten that it's not just a regular cloud that they're dealing with, He promises to give them bread in the morning and meat in the evening in the form of quail. This manna seems to serve a threefold purpose. It serves a practical purpose by feeding the people. It serves an eternal purpose by glorifying God and showing his power. And 3, it serves a spiritual purpose by testing the people and training them to actually trust in God. So he tells them to gather manna every day except the Sabbath, which is a Hebrew name for the 7th day of the week, what we call Saturday. God is testing for potential pitfalls in their thought life, Will I have a scarcity mentality and try to hoard the manna, or will I trust in God? Simple question. Am I willing to work twice as hard gathering on Friday in order to rest on Saturday? Another question. Will the food I gather on Friday be enough to carry me through Sunday morning? Another question. Will God keep his promise to provide for me if I stop to rest as he commanded? God had not given them the 10 Commandments yet, but he's been hinting at this idea of resting on the Sabbath since creation. And he points to it again here. If they trust that he controls the forces of nature, they hopefully will respond by obeying. So what happens then? Well, When they moved to a new site with no water, God had Moses strike a rock with his staff, and water pours out. That's provision. God is providing again. Then we see his protection when an invading army attacks them out of nowhere. Moses appoints Joshua to put together a last-minute army so they can fight back against the Amalekites. They were distant relatives of Esau, as we covered before. Now, during the war, Moses stands on top of the mountain and holds up his hands and his staff. As long as he does that, the Israelites are winning. But when he lowers his hands, they're losing. So here comes Aaron and Hur, prop up his arms until Joshua and his army win at sundown. So God promises to destroy the Amalekites for attacking his people. And guess what? They don't exist anymore. We're never going to see them after First Chronicles, except for a brief mention in the Psalms. I told you already that Saul will encounter them and then David, but then after that, they're going to be gone. Now, after the battle, Moses builds an altar and gives God a new name. The Lord is my banner, Jehovah Nissi. A banner is a visible identifier on display. Banners commemorate a victory for the winning team. A flag is a kind of banner. The Lord is my banner means a lot of things. God is victorious. I want to honor God's victory. I want to remind myself what God has done. I want everyone to know that I belong to God. Giving God this name is an act of worship, Jehovah Nissi. And it is also a personal statement that Moses is making about his own identity. Now, and finally, one day Moses' father-in-law Jethro steps into the picture with some good advice. Delegates tasks to trustworthy, tiered leadership. Moses could have said, thanks, Jethro, but I got a direct line to Yahweh. That's what he could have said, but no. I even joked, saying, you can't tell me what to do, but it's always good to listen to advice from people who just mean only to help you out. So he's humble and knows good wisdom when he hears it. Could God have given Moses his counsel directly? Of course. But sometimes God uses others as his mouthpiece. So, in essence, what did we glean out of the whole 3 chapters? If I could summarize it in one paragraph. Let me see. Well, God commands his people to rest and trust him to provide. They've been slaves with no days off, so it feels unnatural for them not to strive and work. But this is just one more way God shows them that he's a better God than Pharaoh. Pharaoh commanded them to work, but God commands them to rest. He knows our human nature longs to earn things, to feel accomplished, but the very nature of his relationship with us is that we are the recipients, not the earners, right? Not the doers either. He is a doer, and he says, it is done. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9 calls Jesus our Sabbath rest. He finished work on the cross, frees us from trying to earn his approval and favor. We have nothing to offer anyways. Seriously, nothing. So hopefully that makes sense.
Rudy, here's
Alexa,
a reminder.
Stop.